It was 2012, the year I learned to distrust my own reflection. The first time I saw the mirror, I wasn't looking for anything special. Just another Saturday rummaging through thrift shops, hoping to find a quirky vase or a cheap picture frame to spruce up my dingy apartment. The mirror caught my eye immediately. Its frame was old and tarnished, etched with strange, almost floral designs that twisted like veins. A small brass plaque at the bottom read, "See tomorrow today." Cheesy, right? The woman at the counter was eager to get rid of it, practically shoving it into my hands for half price. "It's been here forever," she said, her tone light, but her eyes darting toward it like it might shatter if she looked too long. I laughed it off. If anyone had reason to fear mirrors, it was me. You see, I've always had this thing. A stupid childhood fear, maybe, or something worse. My reflection doesn't always feel like me. Sometimes it lingers a second too long, or its expression doesn't quite match. As a kid, I told my mom. She said it was just an overactive imagination, but she stopped keeping mirrors in the house after that. I hadn't thought about it in years, until this mirror came home with me. That first night, I propped it against the wall in my studio. It felt wrong hanging it up, too heavy, too final. My place was quiet except for the creak of the radiator and the occasional muffled voices of my neighbors. The mirror stood there, innocent enough, but I couldn't shake the sense it was watching me, even with its back turned. When I finally looked into it, my reflection stared back, normal as ever. My messy brown hair, my too big sweatshirt, the unwashed paintbrush in my hand. I laughed at myself, shaking off the paranoia. Then I saw the note tucked into the frame, yellowed and brittle. 3 rules. Rule number 1, do not touch the mirror when it shows the future. Rule number 2, do not speak to anyone in the reflection. Rule number 3, do not use the mirror more than 3 times in a day. Classic thrift shop weirdness, right? I rolled my eyes, tossed the note onto my cluttered desk, and went to bed. The first time it showed me something different was the next morning. I was groggy, my brain still clawing its way out of sleep. As I passed the mirror, my reflection wasn't holding a coffee mug like I was. It was holding a bouquet of flowers. My stomach tightened, a primal instinct warning me that this wasn't normal. I blinked, and the flowers were gone. The mirror was back to mimicking my every move. I blamed it on leftover dreams and caffeine withdrawal, but deep down, I didn't believe myself. Later that afternoon, as I left my apartment, a delivery guy handed me a bouquet of yellow daisies. "For Sophia Carter," he said, reading off his clipboard. No note, no sender, just like in the mirror. By that evening, I was staring at the thing, daring it to show me something else. When it did, I wished I hadn't asked. This time the reflection didn't match me at all. It showed my living room with the lights off, empty except for a man standing in the corner. I whipped around. Nothing. The air felt heavier, like I'd just missed someone walking out of the room. I clutched my phone, my thumb hovering over the call button for 911. I didn't sleep that night, and the mirror stayed propped against the wall. The next morning, I remembered the rules. Do not use the mirror more than 3 times in a day. What happens if I do? Why shouldn't I touch it? And who, exactly, am I not supposed to talk to in the reflection? I shoved the mirror into my closet, locked the door, and vowed to forget it ever existed. That didn't last long. By the next evening, the mirror had wormed its way back into my thoughts. I sat on my couch, surrounded by unfinished paintings, trying to convince myself the whole thing had been a fluke, a coincidence about the flowers, some kind of hallucination about the man in the corner. But the memory of his figure, blurred and almost out of focus, gnawed at me like a splinter I couldn't reach. That's when I heard the thud. It came from the closet where I'd stashed the mirror. My chest tightened, every instinct screaming at me not to investigate. But the sound came again, louder this time, like something heavy shifting on its own. My hands shook as I opened the door, expecting what, exactly? A burglar hiding behind my old winter coats? But it was just the mirror, toppled onto its face, the rules note pinned beneath the frame like it was mocking me. I told myself the crash was gravity, a poorly balanced closet. But when I propped the mirror back up, my own reflection was no longer there. Instead, it showed the scene of my kitchen, exactly as it was now, but with one crucial, horrifying difference. The back door was wide open. I froze. My kitchen door was locked. I had checked it before I sat down. Before I could move, the reflection shifted. A shadow crossed the open doorway, the figure from the corner last night stepping into view. He walked slowly, deliberately, into my kitchen, his face shrouded in darkness. He was holding something, a length of red string. I spun around to face the kitchen, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The door was closed, bolted tight, exactly as I'd left it. Breathing ragged, I turned back to the mirror. The figure was gone. My own reflection stared back at me, pale and trembling. But at least it was me again. That was the moment I realized the mirror wasn't just showing me what would happen. It was showing me what could. The next day, the note vanished. I searched everywhere, tearing through piles of papers and canvases. It was gone, like the mirror had swallowed its own warning. The twist came that afternoon. As I stood in line at the grocery store, scrolling mindlessly on my phone, a child walked up to me. A girl, no older than 7, her big brown eyes locked onto mine. "You shouldn't have looked," she whispered, her voice too calm for a child. "You're letting it decide for you now." I opened my mouth to respond, but the girl was gone. I scanned the aisles, my pulse racing, but she'd disappeared, as if she'd never been there at all. When I got home, the mirror was waiting for me. The reflection wasn't of my apartment this time. It was a field, endless and desolate, with a single red thread running through the grass. At the end of the thread, someone was waiting. It wasn't a stranger. It was me. I stared at the mirror, my reflection, or what should have been my reflection, standing in the middle of the field. The other me held the end of the red thread, her face unnervingly calm, almost serene. My stomach knotted as her lips moved, silently mouthing something I couldn't hear. I turned away, refusing to let the mirror win. But the image burned into my mind, and curiosity clawed at me, relentless. What was at the other end of that thread? The next day, I avoided the mirror entirely. I threw a sheet over it and tried to bury myself in painting, but nothing worked. My brush strokes felt aimless, my colors dull. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. By evening, I couldn't resist any longer. Pulling the sheet away, I prepared myself for the worst. But the mirror just showed me, normal me. My messy studio, my tired face. Relief swept through me, but it was fleeting. Then I noticed the red thread. It was faint, barely visible at first, but there it was. A thin line tied around my wrist in the reflection. My real wrist, however, was bare. The reflection of me raised her arm, showing the thread stretching taut into the void beyond the mirror's frame. She didn't look at me, though. She was looking at something, or someone, behind me. I spun around, heart racing, but there was no one there. Just my empty apartment and the hum of the radiator. When I turned back to the mirror, my reflection was gone. The field had returned, but this time, the red thread extended beyond the horizon, disappearing into a swirling fog. The other me was gone too, replaced by something worse. The figure from before, standing at the edge of the field. He was closer now, the thread wrapped around his hand like a leash. And he wasn't alone. There were others behind him, faint outlines in the mist, all holding threads of their own. The twist hit me like a punch to the gut. The mirror wasn't just showing me the future, It was showing me a web, connections I couldn't see, choices I hadn't made yet, pulling me towards something far beyond my understanding. I slammed the sheet back over the mirror, breathing hard, but it was too late. My phone buzzed on the counter. A single text message lit up the screen, sent from an unknown number. "Don't follow the thread." I dropped the phone, a chill running through me. The red thread wasn't on my wrist yet, but I knew it would be soon. The message haunted me all night. Don't follow the thread. Who had sent it? How did they know about the mirror? Every attempt to rationalize only left me more tangled in my fear. By morning, I was determined to get rid of the mirror. I grabbed it, ready to haul it down to the curb, but the moment my hands touched the frame, the reflection shifted again. This time, it wasn't a field. It was my apartment, but the walls were blackened and cracked, like something had burned them from the inside. My reflection was still gone, replaced by that same man holding the thread. He wasn't in the corner anymore. He was standing where I stood, his hollow eyes staring directly at me. I yanked my hands away, heart pounding. The mirror was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly, almost like it was alive. The twist came when I noticed the string. The red thread wasn't just in the reflection anymore. It was real, tied tightly around my wrist, its other end trailing under the mirror's frame. My stomach turned as I realized the thread wasn't connected to the man this time. It led to something else, something darker. The note's second rule flashed through my mind: do not speak to anyone in the reflection. But what if they tried speaking to me? As if on cue, the mirror flickered. My reflection reappeared, her face pale and twisted with fear. She raised a hand, pointing behind me. I froze, dread prickling down my spine. Slowly, I turned around. The apartment was empty. Nothing was there, but the thread tugged against my wrist, pulling taut like it wanted me to follow. I forced myself to look back at the mirror. My reflection was gone again. Instead, the scene shifted to a single door in a dark hallway, the red thread disappearing beneath it. The man was gone too, but the sense of being watched remained, heavy and suffocating. The text buzzed again, but this time, the message wasn't a warning. "It's too late now. Finish it." I didn't know what "finish it" meant, but the pull on the thread grew stronger, yanking me toward the mirror until I was standing inches away. My hands trembled as I reached for the frame, not to lift it, but to tilt it forward, to see if the thread was really disappearing underneath. It wasn't. It was coming through the glass, stretched taut and vibrating like a string plucked in some hellish symphony. And then, faintly, I heard it. A whisper. "Come closer." The voice was mine, but not mine. It was distorted, cracked, like something trying too hard to sound human. I stumbled back, ripping the thread off my wrist, but it was useless. The thread snapped back, tightening until it burned my skin. The whisper came again, louder this time. Closer. The mirror's surface rippled like water, the thread pulling me toward it. Whatever was on the other side wasn't just waiting for me. It was hungry. My breathing quickened as I remembered the note's first rule. Do not touch the mirror when it shows the future. This wasn't my future. It was my choice. The thread burned hotter, pulling harder. I grabbed a pair of scissors from my desk and sliced through it, the blade trembling in my hand. The thread snapped, recoiling into the mirror like a serpent retreating into its lair. The whispers stopped. The mirror cracked, spiderwebbing across the surface, and for the first time in days, I felt the apartment breathe again. But as I stared at the shattered glass, something inside the mirror shifted. A hand, a burned, twisted version of my own, pressed against the other side of the crack, pushing. The story wasn't over yet. I froze, staring at the hand pressing against the other side of the mirror. It wasn't just my reflection. It was me, or something close enough to make my skin crawl. The hand twisted, clawing at the cracked surface as though it was trying to force its way through. Instinct screamed at me to run, to leave the apartment and never look back, but something stronger held me in place. A morbid fascination, maybe. Or fear that if I turned away, I'd never know what was waiting to come through. The mirror groaned, the cracks spreading further, and then I heard it again. My own voice. Help me. It wasn't distorted this time. It sounded real, raw, and desperate. I took a step back, shaking my head. "You're not me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "You're not real." But the voice didn't stop. "Help me," it pleaded again, softer this time, almost breaking. The hand on the other side pushed harder, and for a split second, I thought I saw tears welling in its darkened eyes. My eyes. Then the twist hit. The crack spread further, and suddenly, I wasn't the one standing in my apartment anymore. The reflection shifted, and now I was the one trapped on the other side of the glass. The apartment looked distant and distorted, as though I were staring at it from underwater. On the other side, a version of me, smiling, calm, and eerily composed, stood in my place. She picked up the scissors I'd used to cut the thread, twirling them idly in her hand. "I warned you," she said, her voice smooth and cold. "What are you doing?" I shouted, pounding on the glass. My voice sounded muffled, like shouting into a void. "Let me out!" Her smile widened, cruel and sharp. "You let me out!" I tried to piece it together, heart racing. The thread, the warnings, the man in the corner. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were trying to stop her. "Please," I begged. "You don't have to do this." The other me tilted her head, considering me like a curious child. "Oh, but I do," she said. "The mirror doesn't take, it trades, and I've waited a long time for someone like you." She turned, walking toward the door, leaving me behind. The glass began to ripple again, darkness creeping into the edges of my vision. It felt like the mirror was swallowing me whole, pulling me into a void I couldn't escape. I screamed, but no sound escaped. And then, just as I thought I'd be lost forever, the door to my apartment burst open. The man from the reflection stepped inside, his face finally clear. He wasn't a stranger. He was older, weary, but unmistakably familiar. He was my father. He looked at me, at the version of me trapped in the glass, and whispered, "I told you not to look." The apartment dissolved into chaos. The mirror cracked further, shards falling away into nothingness, and I felt myself being pulled in two directions. One toward the darkness, the other back into the world. The last thing I saw before the glass shattered completely was my father grabbing the red thread, wrapping it around his hand as he stared at the other version of me with a look of pure determination. And then, everything went black. I woke up on the cold floor of my apartment, the broken shards of the mirror scattered around me like shattered promises. My head throbbed, my body aching as if I'd been pulled through something far darker than any nightmare. The last thing I remembered was my father, his face full of desperation as he wrapped the red thread around his hand. But now, everything was still. No more whispers, no more reflections, just the silence of the empty room. I sat up slowly, trying to steady my breath. The apartment looked normal, too normal. Everything was exactly where it should be. The canvas of unfinished paintings was still propped against the wall. The kitchen counter was cluttered with yesterday's dishes. It was as if nothing had happened, except for one thing. The red thread was back. It wasn't on my wrist, not this time. It was on the floor, winding its way across the room like a snake, pulling toward the closet. I followed it, trembling, unable to stop myself. The thread led me to the closet door, the same place I'd locked away the mirror. The door creaked open, and there it was, propped up against the wall again, gleaming in the dim light. I froze. This wasn't possible. I had shattered it. I had seen the shards. The mirror wasn't just repaired, it was pristine, perfect. And in the reflection, there was no sign of me, no version of me, no other me, nothing at all. Just an empty room. The twist hit me like a punch. The reflection wasn't just showing me the past, the future, or even alternate versions of myself. It was showing the world, the same world, but from a place where I no longer existed. The moment the mirror broke, I disappeared. I staggered back, horrified. But as I did, I felt it. A pull. The thread, somehow tightening around my wrist, leading me closer to the mirror. A voice echoed in my head, my father's voice, faint but clear. "You're not supposed to look." And then the true horror of it settled in. The mirror wasn't a tool to predict the future. It was a portal. And in every moment I had stared into it, in every choice I had made, I had been rewriting the world without realizing it. The red thread wasn't just a guide. It was a tether, pulling me back into the world I had erased. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the mirror's surface. As my fingers brushed the glass, the world around me twisted, and I saw everything. The broken reality, the empty apartment, the people I had once known, all fading, slipping away. And then the reflection shifted, showing a final, haunting image. My father, standing in the doorway, staring at the mirror, his face filled with resignation. "You should have never looked," he whispered, before everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was still in the apartment, but the mirror was gone. The red thread had vanished. The world once again felt empty, as if I were the only one left. And I knew then, the mirror hadn't just trapped me, it had taken everyone else too. I stood in the apartment, the silence pressing in from every corner. The mirror was gone. The red thread was gone. The air itself felt hollow, like the life had been drained from the room. I wandered through the apartment, checking every corner, every shelf. It was all too quiet, too still. Then, I found it. It was a small detail, easy to miss, something out of place. The clock on the wall had stopped, frozen at 12:07. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part was that the clock had never been there before. I stumbled back, my pulse quickening. The apartment, the place I'd lived in for years, had changed. Everything had changed. But how? Why? I turned around, desperate for some sign of reality, when I noticed it. On the desk, beside the scattered papers and unopened mail, there was a photo I didn't recognize. In the picture, there I was. Not the me I knew, but a version of me standing next to someone I didn't know. A man, tall, with dark hair, smiling beside me in a park. The photo looked old, worn at the edges, as if it had been taken years ago. I blinked and turned the picture over. The handwriting on the back was unmistakable. "To Sophia, from Dad, 2012, your 25th birthday." The twist hit me like a punch to the stomach. The man beside me wasn't just any stranger. It was my father. The same father who had vanished the moment I touched the mirror. The same father who had warned me, whose voice echoed in my head. But I never turned 25. I couldn't have. I had been trapped, caught in the loop of the mirror's false futures, for far longer than I realized. I felt dizzy, my breath catching in my throat. Had I created this? Had I erased my own life, pulled it into a twisted reflection of what I wanted, what I thought I wanted? Or had the mirror already started to unravel everything, making me forget the truth? The apartment felt colder now, darker. A low hum began to rise from the walls, the floor, the very air itself, like a distant storm building on the horizon. I looked toward the window, seeing nothing but thick, oppressive fog rolling outside. Something was coming. A shadow fell across the room, and for a split second, I thought it was my father. But no, it was me. The other me. The version of me that had been trapped in the mirror. The one who smiled with cold, empty eyes. She stepped forward, her steps silent, as if the floor couldn't feel her weight. "You shouldn't have left," she whispered, her voice like 1,000 echoes, overlapping with my own. I backed away, but the mirror's curse had already taken hold of me. I was trapped, caught between the fractured reality I had created and the one I had lost. The final twist came when she spoke again. "You are the mirror," she said. "We always were." And with that, I felt the last threads of my existence unraveling, pulling me into the fog, into the never-ending reflection where there was no escape, no future, no past, just the mirror, forever.